Good afternoon, folks. It's Wednesday. It's your pal and Sherpa Ian B. Walters filling in for my friend and our chairman, Matt Schlapp, who is getting some well-earned time with with the 6 girls in his life, his 5 daughters, and his lovely wife. We're not going to do any wind-up or monologue this morning because our guest has a lot to say, and I'm very eager and honored to be able to introduce to our CPAC Live audience Angela Stanton-King, civil rights activist, criminal justice reform advocate, and also candidate for federal office in Georgia's 5th District running against John Lewis. Angela, how are you this afternoon?
I am wonderful. I am so honored to be on your show today. Thank you. Tell everyone I said hello, and I'm just grateful to be given this opportunity.
You know, there are a lot of folks who are in our CPAC audience and conservatives across America who know your godmother, Alveda King, who
Yes.
of course is Dr. Martin Luther King's niece, and so you've got a real connection there to the civil rights movement in America. But you're running against John Lewis. He's a Democrat. You're a Republican. I thought we were all supposed to be racist, Angela, and not concerned with civil rights or issues affecting the Black community. How did you come to be a Republican? How did that happen?
Well, let me first tell you that if anyone can break down those barriers, it's definitely me. So we don't want to become a part of the group think and think that people that haven't had, listen, the bottom line is I am the Republican nominee for Georgia. And so that should tell you everything that you know about the Republican Party and how willing they are to give people like me a second chance. So I became a Republican after being a lifelong Democrat. I mean, listen, this is what everybody did. Everyone that I knew in my neighborhood, my family, all of my friends, we all just voted Democrat because that's what I guess we related to. Doesn't mean that that was necessarily what was best for us. So over the years, and some of you may have known my story, but I did spend some time back in 2005 in prison for a nonviolent charge. And during that time, I was pregnant and I ended up giving birth to my daughter, chained to a bed with the sheriff watching and having her snatched right out of my arm 24 hours later. Now, after my release from prison 2.5 years later, it was a very long journey to restoring and redeeming my life. I mean, I was released from prison after my mother and grandmother both had died during my incarceration. I was given a $25 check and a bus ticket and told, here, go start your life over. Well, in the process of starting my life over, no one wanted to give me a second chance, not only because I was a convicted felon, but I was also a single mother. I was considered to be a liability. And then those government benefits that, were offered so much from the Democrat Party, I had been denied those because I was a convicted felon. So now my back was completely up against the wall. I had 4 children I had to take care of. It seemed as though I was in a dark tunnel with no way out. By the grace of God, I found my way to my godmother, Alveda King, after being rejected from our 3rd homeless shelter because they didn't have any room. My children and I were looking for somewhere to go, and someone told us about a crisis center that would help women and children. I stumbled in this center and began to tell my story, having no idea that the lady sitting behind the desk was Dr. Alveda King. So from that moment on, I've walked with her hand in hand, and I began this journey on not only restoring my life, redeeming my life, but also restoring our communities. So, before, when I was stuck, right, with the Democratic mindset, I was content and would have never gone above and beyond to write a book, to start my own business, to begin nonprofit organizations, if I haven't had the safety net of welfare dependency snatched right out from under me. So that's something that began to wake me up from Democratic policies. And then on this road to redemption, and I want to say in 2018, I was watching how America and everybody was crying about family separation at the border. And I was like, wow. I said, well, wait a minute. And I called my godmom because I remembered my story. And I remembered when my daughter was snatched right out of my arms and I was an American citizen. And this was for a nonviolent crime. And guess what? President Trump was not the president at the time. So this lie and this narrative that the media was feeding everyone that President Trump is separating families at the border. He's the worst person we've ever seen. I knew that that wasn't true. So I said, you know what? While everyone is fighting for the people at the border, why not begin a fight for family separation in the border? Has anyone ever thought of the fact that anyone in America, if you've ever been arrested, you're going to be separated from your family? Your kids don't go to jail with you. This is American law. So from there, I told my godmother again, I said, look, I want to get involved in criminal justice reform. And so the president put out a call for anyone that knew of anybody that had been in the system and been unjustly treated, for us to come tell our stories, to help him in this fight for criminal justice reform. So I'm looking as these entertainers like Jay-Z and Meek Mill are refusing to go. And I called Elvita and I said, you know what? I said, send me in. I said, I'll tell my story. And I know a lot of people that have been left behind. Not only did I go in and tell my story and grab the attention of the president's ear, but we got the First Step Act passed. He also made it illegal to chain women to the bed during childbirth. We moved on from there to begin the proceedings for the Second Step Act. And then, by the grace of God, I got a pardon myself officially from the president. And now I'm running for office. I'm bringing my experience. I'm bringing my education. I'm bringing my God-fearing voice and fight to Congress. And we're going to win. And we're going to turn this seat.
What a powerful story of, and you said the word yourself, of redemption and of second chances. You know, human beings are not perfect. We are all fallible. We are all capable of making mistakes and sin. It's part of being a human being. And I know that you know, and I know that a lot of the folks in our CPAC community know that since Matt Schlapp took over this organization, took over the event CPAC with Dan Schneider, with our friend Pat Nolan and David Safavian and the good work that they do on criminal justice reform, that we've made that a top priority, making sure that the dignity of every human being, regardless of race, religion, creed, or gender, gets a chance to live a fulfilled existence. And this is one of the motivators that drive us every day when we come into this office, to try to provide that, because every human being deserves that opportunity to be full, to live as a human in full capacity. Let me ask you, what a powerful story about giving birth behind bars. There was a recent Supreme Court ruling earlier this week where Justice John Roberts sided with the liberals on the court in the June medical decision that said that abortion providers in the state of Louisiana don't have to meet the same standards that other surgical centers have to provide: health, cleanliness, just the basics. What's your take on that, and what's your sense of what it means to as a woman, first of all, to carry a child, and what are the responsibilities that go along with that as a mom?
I mean, to speak specifically to that ruling, I'm not surprised. I mean, abortion clinics are murder mills. No one is in there providing health. No one is in there providing care. So why would they care about cleanliness? They're going to end the life of the child, harvest the organs, sell the organs, and then they're just done with it, and they send the mother home like nothing has ever happened. As a mother, I have to stand and agree with the president and say that every life is truly a gift from God. Life begins at the moment of conception. How do we know that? We know that because we all got here because our mothers got pregnant. It wasn't when she got pregnant. It wasn't if she was 3 months or 4 months. It was because our mothers got pregnant. We also understand lifespan development. We know that you go from being an embryo to a fetus, to an infant, to a child, to a toddler, and it just goes on and on and on till the end of life. And we also know that abortion kills the life, because if it was not alive, you would not need an abortion to kill it. and dead things do not grow. So let's just be honest here and all come to the understanding that what we are doing when we are advocating for pro-choice and we are voting for abortion mills, that we are ending the lives of innocent people. And here's the thing. None of the people that are advocating and fighting for abortion has ever been aborted. That should tell you everything that you need to know. I stand for life.
Is there a racial component to what Planned Parenthood does? Speak to that for a moment.
Of course. So if anyone does their research and they go back dating all the way to not only the Negro Project, but also Title X funding, you'll know that these funds and these policies were put in place strictly for low-income poverty areas. Well, we know that the majority of low-income poverty areas are people of color, which is why we hear the Democrats and Alyssa Milano and all of them always saying, hey, Black people are disproportionately impacted. They need access to abortion. If Black people don't have access to abortion, they will die. So everything for some reason disproportionately impacts us. I mean, I don't know what it is in my skin. I mean, they say we're all the same on the inside, and Black women, all women, have been giving birth since the beginning of time, like every other species. So what is it in my skin that says I'm healthier or safer to abort than to give birth?
That is a strong message. Now, you, of course, are in Atlanta. We're up here in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm a native Washingtonian, like I mentioned to you earlier, and it's been very difficult to watch the city burn, to watch the vandalism and the destruction, and to watch the mob go in there on a daily basis and try to take down some of these statues in a violent fashion. Give us a sense of and I've seen many clips of what's happening down there in Atlanta, but what's your sense of what's happening on the ground down there in Atlanta? It looks bad on some days.
You know, I was just riding through Atlanta the other day. I had a friend come in town. I'm sorry, I'm back. I had a friend come in town the other day, and we were just riding through Atlanta, and I was looking and saying, wow, it looks so bad. It almost looked destitute. I mean, you see people literally laying in the streets and you have to walk over them. It reminds me of Skid Row. You go down and you look at our buildings and they're spray painted and they're boarded up and it's so much broken glass. So what that tells me is that there is time for new leadership, right? So now we are seeing these things happen right before our eyes. It's not being talked about behind the scenes. It's not being hid from the media. It's not being covered up. We're all watching what's happening. And if we're not waking up and realizing that it is the leadership of these cities, of these states that are responsible and not the president, because 911 calls don't go to the White House. I don't know who needed to hear that. But there is a system, right? There's a balance of powers, and we need to begin to educate our community so they make sure that they are projecting their anger, their frustrations, and their issues in the right place and to the right source.
You are running against Congressman John Lewis, who, while I disagree with his politics, I think a lot of Americans, rightly so, admire his story and his actions and marching with Dr. King in the 1960s. He'd been in Congress a long time. When you're talking about leadership that's been there for too long, are you talking about Congressman Lewis specifically?
Well, I'll tell you this, I remember John Lewis when he marched over that bridge. It's the story that we hear every time he gets up on stage, and all respect to Mr. Lewis, but the reality is that today, what we see happening, we are still marching and fighting for the same injustices that he was supposedly marching and fighting for then. So if we are 40 years into this and we haven't seen a change, and in fact, it's gotten worse, then that means that it's time to pass the torch. Let's try something different. And another thing is, I pay close attention to who people support, who support them, and what it is that they are standing for and fighting for. So if you are a civil rights leader, it is very hypocritical to say that you are tired of oppression, that you are tired of being an oppressed minority, but yet and still you encourage people of color to abort their children. Listen here, Black America, if you're tired of being a minority, why do you keep aborting your votes?
Do you think that there's a difference between the movement that occurred in the 1960s, the nonviolent actions of Dr. King, the singing of religious hymns, protesting the state of affairs for people of color, and what's going on today in the streets of America?
Well, we definitely see a difference. I mean, even if we look back and remember along that process, what happened with Rodney King, I mean, they burned and rioted down in LA and still did not get the answers that they were searching for. So we know that rioting is not the answer. Burning down our own communities, destroying businesses that come and provide opportunities like jobs to our communities, that's not helping us at all. So there's definitely a lack of leadership, not only in office, but also on the streets, on the grounds, in the churches. When I was on the ground, I didn't see anyone out there peacefully leading the people. It was a bunch of young people that were hurt, that were lost, looking for anyone to come in and direct them. And then what did they do? We had Antifa coming in, being shipped in by the busloads, and you've got a youth, a community following right behind them, thinking that's the answer. So leadership is definitely what's needed, not only in the Black community, but everywhere.
Angela Stanton-King, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, taking a break from the campaign just for 15 minutes to spend some time with our CPAC family. Where can we direct folks to learn more about your campaign, to learn more about your powerful story of redemption, to learn more about your book, Life of a Real Housewife, which I think is going to be a great read for a lot of us? Where can people learn more, and where can they support your efforts in this important race that you're running down there?
Wow. So guys, you all can find everything you need to know at StantonKingForCongress.com. Again, that's StantonKingForCongress.com. Guys, over at CPAC, I want to let you know that I love you guys. I was invited to CPAC. That was the first time I heard the president speak. That was 2 years ago, and I've been a fan ever since. So you guys will always have my support. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Don't forget, guys, StantonKingForCongress.com.
I'm already looking forward to introducing you to some of my friends in person, in real life, in the flesh, at CPAC 2021, February of next year. Do I have your word that you'll be there with us, win or lose?
I'll be there.
I'll
be there. You have my word, and I'll bring my godmother with me. How about that?
Excellent. We're all big fans of Alveda, and we're becoming big fans of you, and it would give us even more pleasure to be able to introduce you as Representative Angela Stanton-King from the 5th District of Georgia. We wish you the best of luck. We're going to keep an eye on that race, and we're going to do our best to do everything we can to support you and give you a good chance. We appreciate you giving us some reports on what's happening down there from Georgia and Atlanta. Thank you, Angela. And now let's take a quick look at this next video before we introduce the next segment with our friends Jarrett and Inez Stepman. And it's some footage of what's actually happening on the ground in Atlanta, Georgia. For those of you who aren't in Georgia, to get a sense of the wanton destruction that's happening and the misguided youths who seem to be part of this angry mob taking over the streets that we got to figure out how to stand up to.
Mood has definitely shifted as we've seen several standoffs with police officers happening here. Not exactly sure how this thing took a turn, but when you meet raw emotion with daily events and headlines that are playing out in our society as we speak, look at that crowd. This looks like a standoff where you see the police officers facing the crowd there, the crowd looking back at them, holding those signs up, really coming to a fever pitch right now. We do want things to continue to stay peaceful, but it looks like that is not the case anymore, with just the whole tone and the vibe changing, and that crowd has grown exponentially. They started to gather about 3 o'clock They just put out this flyer yesterday. I received it at about 3:15. And in 24 hours, they drew a crowd this large, mimicking scenes in Minneapolis, Denver, and Phoenix, and Louisville. Emotions just very, very raw and high right now. And it looks like there is a heavy police presence, but it also looks like the crowd is so big and so intense. You see the police on the motorcycles there trying to get through the crowd right now as people are waving their signs.
Well, that's a little taste of what's happening in Atlanta. Thanks to Angela Stanton-King for her on-the-ground analysis of the vandalism and wanton destruction going on in that wonderful city that we were at in last year. But it gives me great pleasure to bring on two of our CPAC family members, part of our CPAC community, Jarrett and Inez Stepman. How are you guys?
Doing very well. Good to see you.
Jarrett is a contributor to the Daily Signal and co-host of the Right Side of History podcast. And Inez is a senior policy analyst for the Independent Women's Forum and a contributor to the Federalist. I want you guys, in an effort to cut through all of the noise of what's happening on television and in the newspapers, be sure to listen to the Right Side of History podcast and read all of Inez's stuff at the Federalist. Inez has been very helpful over the years, helping us think through a lot of the things that we talk about at CPAC, and is just very gifted with how to phrase some of these complicated issues. We were all together at CPAC. It feels like 5 years ago. One of my favorite CPAC memories that's going to become part of the legend is, Jarrett, before you and I went up on stage, we initially had 15 minutes or something, and as CPAC things go, they say, well, you're going to be cut down to 8 minutes. And it means that, no wind up. Let's just get right into it. So in the spirit of that, let me ask you guys, what happens if we scrub American history to the point that the mob would like us to scrub it to, pulling down the statues, things that are perhaps offensive, things that are, tough to stomach as Americans, things where we were imperfect in the founding of our nation? What happens if we get rid of all of that, and because it's a difficult topic to address?
Yeah, I think we're going to become a country quickly with no past and ultimately no future. I think it creates a distorted view of humanity. I think that's certainly what the statue topplers will eventually do. They want to purge the past of all of its sins, but I think it ultimately also purges it of the good things that this country is built on too. I think one of the most important things to understand at this moment is that we have many great institutions in this country. America is the freest, most prosperous country on earth, but it was created by flawed and imperfect human beings. And we too are flawed and imperfect human beings. There's no year zero when we're going to create a perfect union, where our hope is to create a more perfect union. We have a constitution that has helped us to build upon that, build on what the founders started when they created this country. You start to go through past and comb through everything that today, by our standards, seems wrong or offensive. There's no past at all. There's no way of understanding how we got to where we are today, which I think is the great miracle of American history. Most of history is filled of tyranny. It's filled of violence. It's filled of hatred. There isn't liberty for all and justice for all. Here in America, we've come very close to that, and that's based on our great history and people of our past who've made many decisions that have led us to that point. This moment is bringing us to a point where we won't understand that anymore, and I think that's a dangerous time for Americans.
I would just add that I think the big difference between the left and the right in the way that we look at this, the left is counting backwards from utopia, and conservatives are looking at as Jarrett said, the tyranny, the bloodshed, a lot of the things that have just marked human existence for most of history, and looking back at American history, yeah, we don't downplay America's sins or the black marks on its history, but what we think is remarkable are the exceptional qualities of America are the things that led to freedom, to the rule of law, because those are the things that are rare in human history, not instances of human beings being atrocious to each other or atrocious systems, not slavery, but freedom is the unusual condition in terms of world history. So I think those are two very different ways of looking at at the past, right? One is it's just a horror show, and we're going to proceed with our Hegelian wheel of history to a perfect utopia that has never existed. And the other, looking back and saying, hey, well, it'd be really, really easy to backslide into tyranny and violence in the state of nature. In fact, what's remarkable about the United States is how far we've come away from that state of nature and how far we've come away from treating each other unequally.
I remember what Jarrett said on the CPAC stage this year, that, George Washington was not a white hero and Frederick Douglass a black hero, that both of these guys are American heroes. Guys, are we watching in front of our eyes and on our TV screens the end of the American experiment? I love just the high-minded rhetoric, and it's very much where all of us live, especially as conservatives, these highest ideals of the founding. But it feels like America's on fire. What's the end game here? I love that notion of sort of reverse engineering utopia is what the left is going after here. Is the experiment on the verge of collapse, or is there hope?
I think it will be if people who still believe in that system don't take courage at this moment and stand up for what's right. One of the great statements of Abraham Lincoln, one of those who's being now attacked by statue topplers, said that right makes might. And I think that those who are defending American history and what this country stands for are in the right. And I think there are very many Americans who still believe in that system. They still believe in the rule of law. They still believe in the Constitution. They're seeing images across this country of lawless vandals who are destroying our cities, who are tearing up our history literally at its root. But I do think there are many Americans today who still believe in what this country stands for. And I think if there are leaders who have courage at this moment to boldly stand against the mob, they will get the support of the American people. I think the average American understands. Maybe they don't understand that in modern universities and higher education and many of America's elite circles, but I think the average American gets that. They see this country on fire. They're looking for leadership at this time, those who can explain what their country stands for and are unafraid to say, no, I'm proud to be an American. I believe in what this country is and what it will be, and I'm going to stand for that no matter what.
Inez, you have written prolifically and presciently on the American education system and specifically its failures for young people. In the 1960s, a lot of the anti-war movement was run off of college campuses. I'm thinking of University of Wisconsin-Madison and the young activist class that bred a generation of left-wing activists. And you, like the Oracle at Delphi, were able to prophetically see what was going on college campuses. And now, as they begin to blow off steam, what's the role that campuses are playing in this destructive moment?
Well, university campuses and K-12. I think conservatives sometimes, look, these ideas, critical race theory, a lot of the ideas that we're seeing play out in what Charles Kessler of the Claremont Institute has, I think, rightly called the 1619 riots. Those ideas originated on campus. They have their roots mostly in the late 60s and the radical left of the late 60s, radical anti-American left, I would add. But now we see the result of institutionalizing those ideas for the last several decades. They started out on campus, but they didn't stay on campus. And I would make 2 points about that. One, they very quickly metastasized to the K-12 system so that, young Americans are not learning about the greatness of their country. They're not learning even basic civics or even facts about America's actual sins, right? For example, only 12% of college graduates actually know that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, right? So even about the ostensible, the worst things in our country that are ostensibly the most important things now, our schools don't even teach the basic facts about that actual time. On the flip side, you have a generation where 2/3 of millennials and then approximately the same number of Gen Z believe that America is deeply racist and sexist, and actually almost half believe that America is one of the most unequal societies in the entire world, which is insane. But that is what is being taught. And unless conservatives start thinking institutionally, I think we are going to lose. I'm maybe slightly more cynical. Like my background is Slavic, it's Polish, and and maybe I'm predisposed to be more depressing, but what really makes me, depressed and cynical is that we aren't seeing a huge reversal in the GOP realizing, or conservative movement realizing, oh crap, like this is the result of not thinking about the education system. This is the result of not thinking about cultural institutions, not thinking about the arts, right? Not thinking about media. I'll exclude from that, because I think conservatives have thought about media, and that's where we've pushed back in some ways the best. We have alternative media, right? But in other sort of cultural institutions, we really haven't, and we've definitely ignored the education system, both K-12 and the higher ed system, for decade after decade. And I don't see the GOP now lining up, for example, to cut student loans that are the lifeblood of every university in America, that is teaching all of their students essentially to be far left activists, to topple statues of Abraham Lincoln. There's no reason the taxpayer should be supporting that, but I don't see I don't see a party of 1776 on the right yet. If the left is the party of 1619 Project and anti-Americanism, I don't yet see a 1776 party, and that is what scares and depresses me, because we cannot go on like this.
Well, what's a conservative to do? My unfortunate sense is that 2020 and that what's happened has been so shocking that a lot of conservatives have been cowed into silence for fear of speaking their mind, for fear that the mob may end up on their doorstep and demand that they take a knee while the national anthem is still the Star Spangled Banner, before the mob demands that we change it to Kumbaya or something. What's a conservative to do in this moment of crisis, where there's real fear among folks as far as being able to stand up? To boot, this atmosphere that you're having your voices squelched on social media, that the education system has been lost, that Hollywood and the media and the arts and the music industry are unfriendly territories for people that have our viewpoints. Are we to go underground, a la Eastern Europeans in World War II, or should we get loud and do we fight back? I'm not advocating like let's go take the streets and become another version of the mob. What's the right way to fight in this moment, in your guys' opinion?
Well, I think being loud and fighting back is part of that. I thought it was great. My friend Dave Marcus, who writes for The Federalist, showed up with a group of counter-protesters at a statue of Theodore Roosevelt in New York City that's going to be taken down. These were patriotic people who showed up and showed something different. I mean, how many images do we get in the media of people toppling statues, of attacking American history with no counter to that? And given a lot of people are locked down right now, we've gone through a pandemic, coronavirus, but I think now is the moment to be loud, to say, hey, we're still Americans, we're still here, and we're going to keep fighting. I mean, we're not going to knuckle under. I think to a large extent that the most radical, aggressive activists who are toppling statues, they're still, I believe, in the minority. Yes, a majority of American culture has been moving their way. They have been pushing for generations. Certainly millennials and Gen Z are very much attached to a lot of their ideas. But the ones who are obliterating statues still are a very loud, vocal minority. And I think it's important for conservatives and those who believe in our history, I mean, across the political spectrum, to stand up and be loud as well and say that the American people, we the people, have a right to speak still. And we're going to keep that right. And those who want to shut us down, they can't do that. And I think now's the time for action. It's not just a time for words, it's a time to go out, in some cases into the streets and say, we're going to defend our history. We're going to defend what we stand for. We're going to defend all the freedoms that we still have, that we cling to. We're not going to let these people take it away. I think right now is a time for action and not just to concede a total victory by the cultural left. Now, we have to understand the cultural left took over institutions in this country, but it wasn't always that way. And the very first thing we need to do is know that, look, we're fighting a kind of cultural war. We need to fight those battles. Yes, it may be late in the game, but I still think that fight is worth having, because isn't our country worth saving?
I actually, speaking of CPAC, we had a great panel, I think, and I'm very grateful to CPAC for letting me participate in it. with Dave Marcus, who you just mentioned, with Sagar and Jetty, and with Spencer Brown of YAP, and we attempted to try to answer this question a little bit, and definitely worth watching, I think, if I may say so myself. No, but we tried to tackle this in sort of a practical way, like what can we do to build new pipelines in media? What can we do in the arts? How can we encourage art that actually is not conservative art, right, but reflects the truth of the human condition? And how do we fight back against universities, right? And I do think there are some things we can do. I think, as Jarrett said, it's late in the game, but the game isn't over. Like I said, what scares me is that I think maybe a large percentage of conservatives don't realize how late in the game it actually is. They think this is sort of a passing madness, and hopefully the health side of this is passing, right? Pandemics end, but the riots and pulling down the statues, they're not a passing madness. They're the inevitable consequence of what we've been teaching young people about their country for the last 30 years or more, and that's not going to go away. It requires, they're not going to stop until they're made to stop, right? In terms of the people breaking the law, they should all be absolutely punished to the fullest extent of the law. And then in terms of people who are peacefully protesting, which is their right, we have to boldly say that they are wrong, right? It is their right to protest, but their underlying thesis is wrong. America is not systemically racist, which is something that even the right seems afraid to say today. America is one of the least racist societies in the history of the world. Of course, racism is a terrible thing, and it's part of our, the human heart, just like greed and sloth and all the other, vices and sins of humanity. We're never going to stamp it out entirely. We're never going to eliminate racism and acts of bigotry. But the system, the American system, is not responsible for racism. The American system is the greatest rebuke to inequality and racism. And we have to be courageous enough to say that, to actually contradict the thesis of the protesters. That's the only way we get out of this, is we actually bring this debate into the public square, and we boldly contradict what their underlying premises are. Because squabbling about policy or police reform, look, I'm in favor of dropping qualified immunity, especially for college administrators. I'm in favor of sort of some of these police reforms. I think that's all a reasonable policy conversation to have. You don't have that policy conversation. That's like negotiating with terrorists. You don't have that policy conversation when cities are burning. And that's not why cities are burning. It's not about police reform. It's about the premise that America is a bad country. And until we match that, we're never going to win.
How can our CPAC live audience members stay in touch with you guys and consume all of the great content that you guys are putting out?
Well, you can check out my work at thedailysignal.com, where I'm a columnist. I also encourage your audience to check out my book, which came out at the end of last year, called The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. Unfortunately, it seems that many of my predictions have come true very quickly as far as the historical figures that have come under attack, including now we see Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, many others. You can also check out my Twitter handle at Jarrett Stepman, where I post a lot of my work and tweet on the regular.
Same thing. You can find my work at iwf.org and The Federalist. And then I'm on Twitter as Inez Feltscher, but you can type in Inez Stepman, it'll pop up. I can't change my handle to my married name because I got one of those blue check marks when they were handing them out to conservatives, and they're never going to give it back to me if I change my handle. So Inez Feltscher at Twitter, and then Inez Stepman at Parler. It's apparently where we have to have backups now in case the tech overlords decide that our ideas are too dangerous to be shared with the Twitter community.
It's absolutely happening. Let's all get on Parler, or somebody told me that it was Parlay, as in Parlez-vous Français. I'm not sure. Pick up that book, The War on History. It's downright prophetic. Jarrett, you're a prophet. Inez, you are the oracle. You guys were on top of these issues and had the clarity and foresight to be able to predict a lot of the unfortunate things that we're seeing happen in America today. We appreciate your help with everything we do, your leadership, and I feel like that if we all stick together, instead of hanging separately, as Ben Franklin said, that we've got a shot at preserving the republic, which is, with America, if America falls, there goes Hong Kong, there goes so many other countries around the world that are looking to America for leadership. So I appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy schedule and joining us. And we love to have you back on. We'd love to have you back at CPAC as we move into the July 4th weekend in just a few days. Guys, I hope it's not the last July 4th that we get to celebrate. I'm afraid that they are coming after every cherished tradition that we enjoy as Americans. Thanks so much for joining us on CPAC Live.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Folks, we're going to be back on Friday with another great edition of CPAC Live. So tune in to us on Facebook, on Twitter, for better or worse, and on Parler at CPAC for another fun-filled edition on Friday at 3:30 p.m. of CPAC Live.